understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged.
If you're listening to this, you are the resistance. The resistance.
We are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America.
It's a trap!
All right, truth seekers, welcome back. Today my guest is from the institute known as FIRE. His name is Cohn, and he's brilliant. Ari, no pressure. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Well, I'd have to agree with you. I'm great. How are you?
So you've truth teller and brilliant. I'm fantastic. For anyone who's wondering, I had originally asked for Greg Lukianoff to come because he was the founder of the society. So don't feel like you're sloppy seconds. I'm pretty excited to chat with you. And then I read that Greg was, how did he describe himself? Was he a bleeding heart liberal? Was he a filthy hippie? He got the Playboy Award? I forget what he said exactly, but
he's definitely got solid liberal credentials. He's worked for the ACLU. He's worked for environmental organizations. He's got no intention of ever voting Republican, as far as I can tell. He's a godless atheist, he's definitely not anything to the right of liberal.
Interesting. So does that mean, is there a discriminatory hiring policy? Like, do you have to buy into the whole shtick there as far as liberalism goes, or can you kind of do whatever you want as long as you're contributing to the
Listen,
cause?
I've never worked with a more remarkably diverse group of people, particularly politically. We have, the hippies, we have the social conservatives, we have a contingent of libertarians, we've got the apolitical, we've got people across the board, and it's wonderful. That actually makes going to work a whole lot of fun sometimes.
Yeah, until one of them shows up with I'm thinking of Fight Club, and goes, until you might know him very well, and one day he might come in with an AR-10 gas carbine powered machine gun just flying round after round.
Well, I'm pretty sure our insurers wouldn't be too happy about allowing firearms in the office.
Or maybe you shouldn't bring me every piece of crap you happen to come by. Look, the institute known as FIRE, I love what you guys do. I love hearing the crazy stories. And I think there was a time when I was reading back one of the stories that you were covering to my dad, and he's like, this has got to be from The Onion. Like, this is made up. There's no way this is really happening. I'm like, we don't live in a sane world, Dad. You understand this? Like, if it wasn't for FIRE, who would be speaking on behalf of these people? So for people still wondering what the heck I'm talking about, give us the 30-second overview of what you do.
So FIRE is a nonpartisan, nonprofit foundation that's dedicated to the preservation of civil liberties on campus. That includes free speech, academic freedom, due process, freedom of conscience, religious liberty, and pretty much, student and faculty rights more broadly. That's our focus and our concern, and we've been doing it for 15 years, and we do it damn well.
And I know that you came on board, I think around 2011. You're an attorney, and I read in your bio that you had studied the famous, quote, National Socialist Party of America case at an early age, which cultivated a profound respect for the First Amendment and a lifelong passion for free speech issues, et cetera, et cetera. What is the National Socialist Party of America case? I'm doing air quotes.
So I grew up in a suburb of Chicago called Skokie, Illinois. And back in the 70s, Skokie was home to, I believe, outside of New York, the largest concentration of Holocaust survivors in the country. And one of those damn Illinois Nazis, as Joliet Jake Blues might say, wanted to march through Skokie with, a group of his ragtag neo-Nazis.
Of course.
And the village of Skokie said, well, no way. You can't bring that through here. And they threw, all sorts of justifications from, they tried saying it was fighting words, it was incitement, it was all this and that. And it took a long time for the case to wind its way through the courts. But eventually the Illinois Supreme Court found that the village could not prohibit either the march or the display of the Nazi swastika simply because it was abhorrent to some people in Skokie. And I went, I'm Jewish. I went to private Jewish schools growing up. We learned about that case. I saw the movie based on those events at a very young age. And ironically, it was actually shown to us as young Jewish kids to show that anti-Semitism isn't dead. You always have to be on guard, all that. I got a very different message out of it, particularly given that a Jewish lawyer from the ACLU represented the Nazis in their court case. And that's what really piqued my interest. And I discussed it a lot with my parents, who were kind of more along the lines of, well, sure, free speech is important, but did a Jewish lawyer have to do it? Meanwhile, I was saying to myself, damn, what a hero. And so that kind of sparked a fascination with the principles of free speech, why it's important to defend it, even when it's people that, would see you vilified and even killed.
Interesting.
Of course, that this has caused lots of consternation among my friends and family.
Yeah, I can imagine so. I mean, it's interesting that this article in the Federalist got a lot of press last week. I think it was announced on the Talking Heads. I don't know if it was Rush or someone covered it about, how quickly the culture has changed to a point where things that were considered abnormal are now considered normal. And, if you can, Tim Hunt's in the news right now because he made a quip. He's a Nobel laureate who made a quip about working in the office with women. And the penalty for that crime is basically losing your job and being a social pariah. And so I think what's interesting about fire is, you hear these cases all the time when it comes to whether it's a bakery or whether it's a pizzeria. I think the college campus is really where people need to be looking. I had Caleb Bonham on my show, who runs Campus Reform. And I told Caleb, if you want to peek at the future, look at the way that a college campus operates, because these are the types of people that want to control how things are done, want to make us the perfect society, want to teach children these lessons. What are the challenges they're facing? What's life like on those campuses? And that's what your focus is. And I always find it interesting. The primary issue you deal with is free speech, is it not?
It sure is. And you're right on the money, because let me tell you, what happens in college doesn't stay in college. Those students are being prepared for the real world, and they graduate and move on to the real world. And generally, they carry those lessons with them into their adult lives. And if you start stifling the culture of free speech and the ideals of free speech in college, all you get then when they leave college are adults who would rather withdraw from public conversation that might be sensitive or uncomfortable, nevertheless important to have. And then society ends up, slowly it trickles over to general society, and we start noticing a severe denigration of public discourse.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned on the show before, it always bothered me when I was dating, I remember asking this girl what religion she was. She's like, I don't talk about politics or religion. I mean, she's super hot, which is why she had that twang in her voice, right? And I'm like, what do you mean you don't talk about it? She goes, it's just not polite. It's not proper decorum. I don't do it. I'm like, well, I heard that over and over again as I was growing up. And then as I got older, I realized that's part of the reason that no one feels comfortable doing it. They think they're not supposed to. And the next step beyond that is why they can't do it if they were forced to. Like if I held a gun to that girl's head and said, do it, she would have been like, I can't, I don't know anything. And that's kind of spread and pervaded most of society. So my question always is, whose idea was it to say that it's not proper to talk about these things? Like whose idea was it to limit free speech on campus? With this guy in Skokie, the debate is always just like with the attorney who was going to end up representing the leader of Al-Qaeda if he was going to go on trial in New York. It's not, oh, this guy's a dirtbag, or how could he do it, or how much is he getting paid? To me, it's no, I really want to know like who's pushing the narrative to have that done here in New York, and who are the players behind the scenes trying to make all these different machinations take place. That's what I'm interested in. So on a college campus, is like you said, someone knew that all these people were going to leave college with these ideas in their brains and go out and withdraw from society and try to build this utopian, paradise. What are some of the things you're seeing on campus? And it's funny to me, especially if Greg had been here, I say, look, the question that they need to ask Jerry Seinfeld and Chris Rock is like, why are we seeing so many free speech issues on campus? Why are these champions of liberty, these liberals, creating these kind of mini societies where free speech is not okay, where you can be punished for thought crimes?
Sure. I mean, it comes from a lot of directions, sadly. On one hand, you have administrators. Now, administrators have many different reasons for things they do. Sometimes they just want to avoid conflict, and they want to avoid trouble. Sometimes they may have an agenda. Other times they might be facing pressure from outside sources. Sometimes they're just ignorant and they don't know what their students' rights are or take them into account when making decisions. Sometimes they can be malicious. The 2007 case of Hayden Barnes at Valdosta State University.
That's a good one.
Where the president, after being told by many people in his administration that he could not expel a student who had put up a flyer or a collage, criticizing the president's project to build a multi-million-dollar parking garage on campus. He was told by many people in his administration, no, you can't just expel him without due process. And he said, I'm going to do it anyways. Well, that was found to be so bad by the court that he was ordered to pay personally the damages when he was found liable for this. And usually the individual government actors are shielded by something called qualified immunity, and they're often not held directly responsible from their own bank account. In this case, he was. That's how bad and malicious it was, and the court evidently thought it was. But then you also have it coming from some faculty members who may have particular beliefs and rightly or wrongly desire to convince students of the propriety or impropriety of certain beliefs. And while they can certainly educate students, they certainly have no authority to mandate particular beliefs or positions of students on campus. And then still yet, you have censorship coming from other students. And this is, I think, the greatest area of concern because it shows the level to which free speech ideals have stooped among student opinions. I mean, when you get to the point where it's not students against the administration, but it's students trying to shut other students up, we're in a severe, free speech crisis almost, where it's becoming an ingrained feature that people are not only accustomed to but desiring, and that's very concerning to us. An example of that recently would be, this was more of a tag team effort, but at Youngstown State University the other month, a student had put up some satirical Straight Pride Week flyers on campus that said something to the extent of, we don't care what you are or who you sleep with, something to that extent. I don't remember the precise text, but some students found this very offensive and went to the administration and said, hey, we don't like this. And the administration kind of just looked at it and said, yeah, we think that's offensive too. Let's round up a posse of students to take them off of all the bulletin boards that they're on. And that was, particularly galling, especially when the public information officer of the university gave a statement to the media excusing that behavior by saying there is no Straight Pride Week. The flyers were completely bogus. Well, we wrote into the university and reminded them, maybe not so gently, that there's no exception to the First Amendment for, quote, completely bogus speech. And so, you have these, the confluence of administrative desire to avoid trouble, faculty members sometimes trying to push an agenda or also just trying to avoid conflict, and students kind of just not wanting to hear ideas they disagree with because they've been taught that, you can just shut the other person up by complaining that they're being offensive.
When I hear that, they do it to avoid conflict, I always kind of laugh. Like here you have this institution of higher advanced learning and, ancient wisdom. And the first thing they do when someone says, I don't like this, is go, yeah, we don't either. We're going to get rid of that. I'm like, that's the example we're meant to follow. The collective wisdom of this institution is, yeah, First Amendment be damned. Like it's got to go. I'm like, how did this happen?
Ridiculous. You picture some kind of, feeble administrator hiding under his desk with his hands over his head, screaming and rocking gently, calling for his mother or something.
Yeah, like the Columbine shooters are walking around the hall. He's like, all right, just get rid of it. Whatever you got to do, make it go away, right?
These are grown adults. They should be able to deal with some conflict and say, hey, that's part of
physically.
the society we live in. Sometimes people don't agree with each other, and sometimes that's uncomfortable. You'd think that a college administrator or somebody qualified to be a college administrator could deal with that. But apparently not.
Well, then maybe they have the updated or progressive college administration qualifications. I need to see the booklet and what that looks like.
I don't even know what the qualifications are anymore.
Like most things, qualifications are now a moving target. Like I was talking to a college PhD professor the other day and said, some people feel like women, some feel like black people. I feel like a PhD. I should be able to just show up and teach classes because I'm starting to think I could do a better job, but I don't know. I'll look into it. Give us some more examples of, I'm familiar with free speech zones. I've read some of the cases that you've gotten involved in, and it's fascinating to me. It's great reading, but I might not be up to speed on the most recent history. Give us some more of the blood-inducing, head-rattling stories that you've been participating in.
Well, you mentioned free speech zones, and there's a really good one from just a few years ago at Modesto Junior College out in California, where
Shocking.
a student who is a veteran of our armed forces was distributing copies of the United States Constitution on Constitution Day, the day where we celebrate the Constitution.
Right.
And he was stopped and told he could not hand out the constitutions outside of the free speech zone, which he would also have to reserve in advance. The student called us, and obviously we were fairly outraged. I mean, the irony was just kind of stupefying. How daft could you really be? And to his credit, Rob made that point to them. He said, "Are you telling me I can't hand out copies of the Constitution on Constitution Day?" Well, turns out, in fact, that's exactly what they were telling him, and they could not understand why that was so problematic.
My next favorite thing is the reasoning behind it. Like when they get the first memo that says, yeah, here's the reason why, and you look at it and go, really? What was it?
I mean, it was just, I think well, I'll tell you exactly what it was, actually. When he went to talk to an administrator about why he couldn't do it, she just kept repeating to him that it was a time, place, and manner restriction. And time, place, and manner restrictions, what the Supreme Court says, a government has to be able to kind of set the parameters for free speech, such as, you can't block a public street or something like that. So they can enact content-neutral, reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. But I'll tell you what's not reasonable, saying that a teeny-tiny percentage of campus is the only place you can exercise your First Amendment rights, and even then only with an advanced reservation. There's, quite frankly, nothing reasonable about that, and colleges should know better. Regardless, the colleges these policies still persist. We recently we helped sue Modesto Junior College with the assistance of the law firm of Davis Wright Tremaine, and Bob Cohn Revere, who's a partner there, a preeminent First Amendment attorney. And then he helped us again when a similar policy cropped up at University of Hawaii at Hilo, and students were likewise told that they had to stay in a tiny, out-of-the-way free speech zone that ended up flooding whenever it rained. It was a soggy little patch. And it should be clear, after the repeated times that these policies have been struck down in court or forced to be revised in light of lawsuits, that these kinds of policies are unacceptable. And just it's mystifying that colleges and universities think they can keep getting away with it. But we're here to make sure that they don't.
Yeah, you know what they ought to do? It's all about the torture of the language, right? I think and the pseudonyms that they use. I think that instead of a free speech zone or free speech conference room that you have to reserve, they should just call it what it is. It's like an Indian reservation for speech. They take the worst piece of land that nobody wants and is basically non-functional and unsuitable for its purpose, and they give it to them and say, this is for you. Here you go. You're welcome.
Well, we've definitely had a case. There was the infamous case of the free speech gazebo. Literally, it was a gazebo, which was the only place where one could speak freely. Kind of nutty, but we joke, although it's true, that the entire United States is a free speech zone, not your tiny 0.07% of campus or whatever.
Yeah, the place where nobody can actually hear what you're saying. Tell me about the campus judiciary. This is something that definitely gets my attention. Every time, it reminds me of when I was younger and someone died at Disneyland and we had just gone, and my grandma sent me this article in the LA Times about how by the time the first policeman showed up, they basically had the whole thing cleaned up. They had a death and there were no policies that were enforceable by the local municipality about what would happen if there was a death at Disneyland. So it's all cleaned, mopped up. People are going on the ride. I think it was by the big Clipper. One of the cleats on the deck had been yanked off because it had been tied off improperly and hit somebody on the head, like ping-balled off of his head. And the cops got there like, wait a second, you can't just do this. You can't do whatever you want. We have procedures. Like, yeah, we can. Why not? And that's what I think of when I hear about campus judiciary, where there's a mob and a trial and a sentencing all before like anybody gets wind of it. Let's talk about that.
Well, and that's a growing area of concern for us, and one that's really kind of exploded since 2011. In April 2011, the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights issued a Dear Colleague letter that told schools that, among other things, under Title IX, they had to resolve sexual misconduct claims using a preponderance of the evidence standard. And preponderance of the evidence means that it just has to be 50.0001% likely that it happened, just more likely that it happened than not. And obviously, when somebody stands accused of what amounts to a serious felony and being branded a rapist, perhaps, the accused student deserves more than that. And 50.001% it seems fairly inappropriate, but particularly inappropriate given the lack of other procedural protections for the accused student.
Yeah, you can get to 50.001 basically by establishing that they spoke at some point and the next morning someone filed a complaint, right? Doesn't that pretty much get you over 50?
Well, sure. And there's, a lot of these cases end up being he said, she said. There's generally not much evidence, physical evidence. Sometimes there's a witness, sometimes there isn't. Sometimes everything was behind closed doors. I mean, you're talking about intimate adult behavior. These things are tricky and frankly very nuanced, and campus courts are not the place to be adjudicating them, and it only leads to abuses and problems. And that hurts victims as much as it hurts accused students as well. They're not getting the justice they deserve in the appropriate cases either. If somebody out there is a rapist, I don't want them kicked off campus where they're free to continue victimizing other people. I want them in jail. It's kind of crazy to say, oh, well, let's put this in the, campus courts and they'll deal with it. And then their campus will be safe. Well, that's great. What happens if you live in the surrounding community? Well, then you're just shit out of luck.
Yeah. It's funny. I wonder what George Orwell would think now that the best way to keep from being accused of being a rapist is to make sure you have a sex tape. Get it all on tape. GoPro.
Well, yeah, there's the joke that consent contracts, like the one in the Dave Chappelle skit from years ago, were the wave of the future. But even at that point, the contract might not do a whole lot. And you see all these apps popping up, the consent apps where, people, say, I consent. But really it means nothing considering that consent can be revoked at any time. And how can you prove that consent wasn't revoked?
Are there? I didn't know. See, I'm not in college. I didn't realize there were. So it's like LegalZoom, but for consenting adults, basically.
basically, they're mobile apps, and they pop up every once in a while and usually disappear pretty fast.
It's ironic to me that, you've got the girl who was carrying her mattress around. To me, that's the ultimate sign of consent. I mean, she's walking around with a giant, she's kind of like the sign twirlers on the corner, in my opinion. I'm like, do I want Subway or do I want the girl carrying the mattress? I don't know. But what are you going to do?
I mean, it's just the abuses that are possible. And sometimes they're well-intentioned and not complete, they're not intentional, and they're, out of a good desire to make campus a safe place. But that's really no excuse for some of the stuff we see. Students are often placed in the terrible position of having to face these campus charges. First of all, not being able to have an attorney with them or be represented by an attorney. And then also, and this makes it particularly bad, while there's potential criminal charges pending, which puts the student in a position of either defending himself in a campus court and having anything he says there be admissible in a criminal trial where the sanctions could be far worse, or remaining silent in the campus court and potentially having that used against him and getting expelled. Or suspended for a long period of time. It's an untenable position, and given the fact that there's, very little by way of cross-examination, rules of evidence, and things of that sort, there are so few procedural protections in these campus adjudications that it's completely, impossible to believe that they're really effective mechanisms for adjudicating these kinds of cases. The unfairness is just rampant.
And the other problem is they're being adjudicated by crazy people. I mean, you look at what's coming out of colleges today, or you look at the state of the nation in general. There's a chapter in Greg's book called Harvard and Yale. I'm like, I'm starting to get to the point where if anyone went to Harvard and Yale, I'm automatically skeptical. I'm like, this person could potentially really screw up, F-word up our country if they applied themselves. And maybe that's not fair to all of them, but you can't get a B if you go to Harvard, and you can't not get a high-paying job that will ultimately kind of wade you into the path of running some sort of government or...
Yeah, well, it does definitely seem like sometimes the name recognition can get you in the door somewhere you don't... might not necessarily be qualified for if you went to a lesser school, but, that's a personal perception of mine. And really, I went to Cornell for law school, so I don't know, maybe that happened for me too. Who knows?
Cornell, ever heard of it? Yeah.
Trust me, I get that enough.
Oh, I'm sure that wasn't original. Sorry. But the Dave Chappelle one's hilarious because my favorite part of the skit's the end when she has to there's the disclaimer and consent. And at the very end, which one does he ever sign? He's like, I promise I won't say anything. He's like, that's right. Cause I'll sue you. Yeah, secrecy clause. I'm curious about, at the end of the book, Greg wrote a chapter or basically a conclusion called Unlearning Liberty and the Knee-Jerk Society. And this is something that drives me crazy. I remember I was in a Facebook group with a friend of mine who leans liberal. I spent a lot of time on the other side just because I really like hearing their arguments and the thought process. And if there's any chance for me to be persuaded, I want to know what that argument is.
Sure.
But they're here in Arizona, and they were talking about this pizzeria in Tucson who swore that they would kick out and refuse service to any of the council members that voted in favor of this. Basically, I don't know if it was a gay marriage petition or a petition that would allow them to discriminate against patrons for certain reasons. And so their response to that was, well, we're going to discriminate. And they were all cheered by the same people who hate this provision and think all those people are horrible human beings. And so I went in this Facebook group and said the only contrarian thing there, which was, hey, let's just stop and think about what you're saying. You hate these people, and in response to them, you're going to do exactly what you're mad at them for doing. And it was crickets. Like I expected to get called names or say, yeah, that actually makes sense, but just nobody responded at all. And I thought, is that the best thing for these anti-free speech people, is just to kind of throw it back in their face and go, you realize you're kind of the problem here, right? Because you're buying into this hysteria. You're participating in the knee-jerk society.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm with you, and that's, something we believe in very strongly over here, that considering, debating, and exploring all possible ideas is how we get to the truth, is how we get to the best possible solutions to our problems. You can't reach truth without confronting falsity. And that process, as activist Jonathan Rauch says, and a friend of Fire, he calls it a system of liberal science where, good ideas survive rigorous checking through public discourse, and the bad ideas are exposed, ridiculed, and tossed out the window. by simply clamming up and not participating and saying, well, there's only one side to this story and we're not going to listen to anything else, you run into the problem that John Stuart Mill pointed out so many years ago, is that you're not only, robbing yourself of the opportunity to exchange a good idea for a bad idea, but you're also, robbing society of the livelier perception of truth, as he said, produced by its clash with falsity. And that's to all of our detriment, to be honest. And it's a worrying trend. And unfortunately, people seem content increasingly to live in their political and ideological bubbles and only talk to people who agree with them. And college is the last place you should be doing that. As Greg is fond of saying, if you go through 4 years of college and aren't offended at least once, you should ask for your money back.
Yeah, I think I read a stat. Maybe Fire put it out about people. The higher you go up the socioeconomic scale, the less contrary ideas that you hear or exposed to, which I thought was interesting.
Well, there was a survey done a while back of students, and they asked the question, how safe is it to hold, or is it safe to hold unpopular ideas on campus? Note that it didn't say express them, just to hold them. And as students progressed from freshman to sophomore to junior to senior, the percentage of people who agreed that it was safe to hold unpopular opinions plummeted. And that's really frightening and really depressing. The fact that as students go through the college experience, they are learning that it's not safe to have an idea that cuts against the mainstream. And if we're headed down that path, it's not a bright one.
Yeah, because then it's not the ideas that are attacked, it's the people who are attacked, marginalized, silenced, thrown pies at, protested, etc., which is what we see on college campus, which is one of the things I would have liked to ask someone like Greg is how do you reconcile the fact that the ideas and people perpetrating them are the reasons that college campuses, it's an ideology that produces this thinking. How do you reconcile the fact that, it's a certain type of thinking that gets you here? If, especially and this is my opinion, if you're a hardcore hippie liberal who is for free speech, it's people in the same camp that run these organizations. I mean, I don't know how many colleges are run by libertarians or run by social conservatives, but I'm under the impression it's a pretty small percentage. So how do you reconcile that?
Well, it's maddening because, let's be honest, free speech is and should be a quintessentially liberal area of concern.
Right.
If they're going to be intellectually honest about it. And so the fact that, many on the left do appear to have turned their back on free speech really angers the people on the left that do care a whole lot about free speech, the people like Greg, who have to kind of confront his colleagues and his ideological, allies and say, hey, what gives here? Frankly, it is difficult to reconcile that. I don't have a good answer for you. It's mystifying. It shows the level of kind of a lack of awareness of how the attacks on free speech act to your own detriment. Because, listen, after, the 60s and 70s and Vietnam and the anti-war protests, people on the left should be acutely aware of the problem of allowing infringements on free speech. They've suffered it pretty bad in the past. And unfortunately, when you get to the point where you're in the position to impose those, sometimes you tend to forget the fact that you were once victimized by it. But the truth be told, nobody should have that power because, well, power is fluid and the person wielding it always changes, and that should scare everyone.
Yeah, and I think that siren song is too tempting for most of them to pass up, and they forget very quickly. It's fascinating to me as well to see it in action. I asked you earlier about a couple standout cases, and I don't know if I interrupted or we never got back to it, but the book has several examples that are just eye-popping good. So throw a couple at us real quick. Tell us the other instances of insanity that we're seeing on college campuses that you're involved in.
One of my all-time favorites I love was last summer, a female student at the University of Oregon was sitting by a window in the dormitory and saw a couple outside and shouted to them, "I hit it first," as a joke, a pop culture reference.
Of course.
That makes me feel old.
Trigger warning. Sorry to everybody who didn't see that coming. Go ahead.
And in response to that short 5-word joke, the university slapped her with harassment, discriminatory harassment, disorderly conduct, and residence hall conduct charges.
Yeah.
And it was, insane. There's just no way on earth that was a rational, reasonable, or, sane approach to the situation. And as anyone who's read Unlearning Liberty and remembers the water buffalo case,
Yep.
Can attest, if there's one thing you don't get away with on Fire's watch, it's punishing someone for shouting something mild out the window. And so we went to bat for the student, and I'd say probably less than 24 hours after we started our PR campaign, they quickly backed it down and the charges went away. And it's, it was a classic case of a public college not being able to defend in public what it does in private.
Right, exactly. When you bring the axe to light, they're untenable, undefendable, which I wish there was.
And I would have loved to be a fly on the wall in whatever meeting the University of Oregon president looked at the people that work under him and said, "Somebody make this go away now." Would have loved to be there. And more recently, just this past spring / summer, we had a student at George Washington University, a Jewish student who went on a trip to India, and he learned about the ancient historical uses of the swastika as a symbol of good fortune and luck. And he went back to his dormitory where he lived with his mostly Jewish fraternity brothers, which had been recently vandalized with Nazi swastikas drawn on the wall. And he wanted to, teach his brothers to, not fear all uses of the swastika and say, "Hey, listen, there's more to this symbol, and that could be a tool of empowerment." And so he put up this small bronze swastika that he bought in India, indisputably an Indian swastika, not a Nazi swastika. And he left the area for a little while, and somebody saw it and called the police, which is another, completely insane response to a fairly mild situation.
Tell that to the people who call after they go to McDonald's. Sorry, go ahead.
And the university slapped him. They suspended him pending the outcome of his disciplinary charges and slapped him with a bunch of disciplinary charges too. And, not only that, but referred the case to the DC Police Department for investigation as a potential hate crime, if you can believe that. And we wrote in and the university refused to discuss his case with us, which sometimes they will do. And we, again, mounted a PR campaign publicizing their bad acts. And we were joined by the Hindu American Foundation, who also wrote into the school and started writing about it publicly. And lo and behold, the student had his hearing and was allowed to return to campus and resume going to class. Another situation in which the university, seemed dead set on doing something, and then all of a sudden we're getting called to the carpet on it and said, well, how do we get out of this, in the path of least resistance? It's overreactions to small things like that really just drive me mad, because it's anyone with an ounce of common sense could have avoided all of that trouble.
It's interesting though with the Hindu or Buddha swastika that if you draw a picture of Muhammad, you're provoking an entire Muslim nation, right? The entire populace. So I can see where the school would overreact with that kind of insanity going around. They would say, well, this person obviously was trying to upset everyone here, and he has no right to offend anyone. And then Brennan Fraser's outside in the rain waiting to fist fight somebody like in School Ties. Like, I kind of get that. All right. At what point do we turn this around? Like, how do we turn the ship around? Does it fire going after every single instance of it one by one? Or do we have to pass a constitutional amendment called the F word off amendment, where you basically have the right. This is something it was genius. I thought of it when all this pizzeria and bakery stuff was going off. Like, why don't we have no shirt, no shoes, no service? And the next to that, I have the right to tell you to F off, and you have the right to be offended at any time for any reason, as often as needed. Like, why don't we have that? Because that's kind of what the Constitution gives us, but we forget so quickly.
Obviously, we'll never be able to go after every single instance. Unfortunately, there are so many of them that, we could double our staff and still not have time for that. What it takes is a couple of things. It takes students being taught the value and importance of free speech, and that kind of culture shift where students start to remember that, hey, it's really important that we adhere to the principles of free speech, particularly in higher education. It takes administrators having incentives realigned for them and realizing that, wow, if we do this, we're going to get called out for it, maybe even sued. And that's part of what FIRE's Stand Up for Speech Litigation Project is doing. We're working with Davis Wright Tremaine and Bob Cohn Revere to help bring lawsuits against schools that violate their students' free speech rights, in the hopes that schools, one by one, as they fall like dominoes, will be sending a message to other schools saying, hey, you better not follow up in our footsteps. But, remains to be seen, given the incredible ability of some college administrators to not take a hint.
Yeah, Bill Maher referred to the gay mafia whacking you. I think you guys should be the school campus mafia. Just go around whacking administrators.
And we also have a legislative program where we're hoping to pass legislation at both the federal level and at state levels that will enhance free speech and academic freedom, such as bills that passed on the state level that do away with free speech zones and declare campuses as traditional, the outdoor areas at least, as traditional public forums. And my colleague Joe Cohn, no relation, and Shelby Emmett are working hard at that and doing some really great work and getting some great bills passed. And so, that's another way that we're taking aim at these issues.
I have one last question that's kind of more selfish in terms of, fighting the culture war, because on the left, you've got all these organizations that are well-funded, and these people basically are busy-bodying their way into all the institutions they need to tweak and make things the way they want them, social re-engineering. And I think too many people that just go about living their lives and working hard and trusting the institution are ignorant of it. So when it comes to an institution like FIRE, I'm always curious about the funding, because it must cost a fortune just to send out all these legal letters to schools and threaten them, because by practice, it's so expensive to be involved in law. Like, how do you keep the ship afloat?
Well, first, this is one of the instances where I really wish Greg was with us, because he's really does so much of the work fundraising for us and is just so phenomenal at it. But you know what? Most of our money comes from individual donors.
Wow.
Your everyday regular Joe. We obviously also receive grants from different foundations that, go across ideological divides. The Playboy Foundation isn't exactly known as a conservative foundation, and they've given us grants before. It's expensive, but it's worth doing, and we're fortunate to have many really passionate supporters who support our work and want to see us continue our work, and we couldn't be more grateful to them. The fact that I can do this for a living, I still wake up in the morning and say, boy, I'm just the luckiest guy on earth. And I couldn't do it without the generosity of the people who support us. So really, I owe them so much in terms of my professional satisfaction.
See, now you're worried Greg is going to hear this, right? Isn't that why you threw that part in? Which, hey, it's all good.
Yeah, well,
No, that's great. I admire that a lot. I think it's fantastic, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges to people who are involved in good work. And like you said, this really does go over ideological lines. I mean, free speech is the one thing, if anything, we should all kind of agree on, and that's not the world we live in anymore.
It's insane that we don't.
So I always like to know where the good money's coming from. I think that's important.
Yeah, it comes from everyone. It comes from you. It comes from me. It comes from someone's grandmother. It comes from all directions, and I'm really glad about that because it also lets us be independent and not beholden to any particular agenda or ideology.
Well, Ari, thank you so much for joining me on the show. I think you've given us a lot to think about. I really admire the work that you do, and I hope that people will get more involved. If they have money to give, do it. If not, they just want to read more about what you do. Tell them where they can find you and where to go.
So our website is www.thefire.org, THEFIRE.org, and you can read all about our latest cases, look up your school's policies, find more information. You can give us a call. Our number is 215-717-3473, and that's on our website too if you have questions. And in particular, I want to note if any listeners are college students or faculty members and are witness to or subject to their rights being violated, on our website, under the Campus Rights Header tab, there's a button called that says Request Help, where you can submit your case. And please, I would encourage people to get in contact with us if they have, if they feel their rights have been violated, and we'll be more than happy to take a look. And you can follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Those links are all on the website as well. And we put out a lot of videos as well, so check out our YouTube channel. All those are linked at the very top of our website.
I'm still waiting for the case where someone says, yeah, I got raped on campus, but it was in a rape box and I had a rape whistle. So there was also mood lighting and a nice soundtrack.
God.
Thank you, Colorado. No, Ari, all jokes aside, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for coming on, and it's a republic if we can keep it. So I appreciate you doing your part.
Thanks for having me. Really, really enjoyed it.
You're listening to the absolute unadulterated truth, courtesy of the Oh Hail Yeah Show. Want more? Hail yeah, you do.
I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to the Young Cons podcast on iTunes or SoundCloud. And make sure to check us out online at youngcons.com/podcast. Or chat us up on Twitter at RealTJHale.
But I'm a big fan of money. I like it. I use it. I have a little. I keep it in a jar on top of my refrigerator. I'd like to put more in that jar. That's where you come in.